Water, food and vital medical supplies are rapidly running out in Gaza as it remains under siege from Israel's offensive.
Aid remains scarce in the Strip as trucks carrying supplies are still facing lengthy checks at the border with Egypt. And we're now joined by Dr. Halima Begum, the Chief Executive of the charity ActionAid UK. And also from the West Bank, we can speak to Bushra Khalidi, who is the Palestinian Policy Advisor for Oxfam. Should we come to you, first of all, Bushra, because you are there, you're seeing it with your own eyes. What can you tell us about what you've seen and what is most urgent in terms of humanitarian need for those there?
I mean, I wish I could give you what is the most urgent, but I think everything is most urgent right now. I would say fuel is one of the most urgent needs, especially to be able to run the power plant and to run the wastewater treatment plants, because one of the biggest issues, at least from the calls that I've been having with my family that is in Gaza, but also colleagues, is the water. There's no drinking water. It's extremely difficult to find bottled water anywhere in the supermarkets. Supermarkets are left with shower gels and deodorants and gel for hair. That's about it that they can find on the shelves. People have, rice and lentils, and they have, those dry kind of products for food, but cooking it in dirty water, is a health hazard. And already my whole family is sick with diarrhea for the last week. And that is because of the water. I've even heard that one of my friends is throwing up blood, and he thinks that this is because of the water that's polluted. So I would say fuel, so that we can run the wastewater treatment plants and get some clean water or semi-potable clean water to Gaza. Because right now what they're drinking is a mix of sweet water and salty water.
What family do you have in there?
I have my mother-in-law and my father-in-law and my brothers-in-law and my sisters-in-law and my nephews and all my husband's aunties and uncles and cousins. Everybody's there. He's one of the only ones that was able to leave and lives with me here in the West Bank.
Are they very frightened?
You must be worried sick.
We're filled with anxiety and anguish all day and night long. And I'm working as well, because I think it's the only thing that's been able to really keep my head above water at the moment, is speaking to you and allowing and the world allowing us a platform to tell the story of what's happening in Gaza, because we don't have connection and we barely know what's happening in Gaza, because information is drip fed. When we can get in touch with them through phone lines, we call throughout the day. Sometimes picks up, sometimes it doesn't. Even though connections were partially restored, at least in Gaza City, where my family had to go back to, there hasn't been really good connection. So they try to move around the neighborhood to try to find some connection so that they can give us a quick call and say they're alive.
How far from a complete collapse do you think Gaza is?
Gaza is unlivable. It's unlivable. It's not how far. It has collapsed. There is no water in supermarkets. There's no fuel. There's no electricity. They are in the dark at night, like under the sound of bombings. I mean, it's terrifying. And we've seen their videos. They've been filming themselves and been begging us to post their posts and their videos so that we can tell the world, what is the terror that they're living through, and the desperate call to please stop the bombing and the ceasefire. That is what we're hearing. It's harrowing to be here and having to speak to them on the phone and give them the news, because they don't have electricity to watch even the news and understand what's happening. So we're further ahead, so we're telling them, and we don't want to worry them more, but then we can't lie. And it's just this position of just hopelessness where we're watching them through the screen, and there's nothing we can do, especially me as a humanitarian worker. I was allowed for the first time to go to Gaza a couple months ago to meet my family-in-law after 8 years. And I am desperate to be able to go back and be part of the response operations, so that I can help my family, but also my colleagues and their families all of my colleagues have been displaced. Most of their homes have been demolished or destroyed or partially damaged. They are living in horrendous conditions, overcrowded places with over 20 to 30 people sharing very little food. The food situation, of course, is dwindling, and again, cooking with dirty water. It's a health hazard to children and to adults.
You speak from the heart, and of course you have evidence, and of course that's exactly why you're here, to give the testimony of those there. But you will be aware of the reports from outside that actually Hamas is holding fuel back for their purposes and not sharing it with the population, and indeed attempts to get people out and into Egypt is also, there are reports, being held up by Hamas itself. You know, can you just give a response on that? Because that is part of the problem for people that want to help, isn't it?
I don't think that that's very correct, first of all, about Hamas denying people leaving to Egypt. That's not exactly the case. I have friends that have double passports. They are being denied by Egyptian authorities and Israelis at Rafah border. There's no Hamas anywhere on, they're not seen. They're not walking around Gaza, stopping people from, leaving their homes or leaving Gaza. Rafah border was bombed on the 19th of October, and Israel controls that border and always has. Israel is an occupying power. It has imposed an illegal blockade on Gaza for 16 years. And has always restricted food, water, electricity from Gaza. Before the 7th of October, Gaza was already facing a humanitarian crisis. We have said it as Oxfam, and I'm sure my colleague, but just one second. Well, and it's just important to say that it has clear duties under international law to protect civilian population. There's 2.2 million civilians in Gaza, and half of which are children. 1 million children live in Gaza. There's 3,000 that have been killed so far. And I just want to say that is the equivalent of 216,000 American kids killed in the US. That is the proportion. We're talking about the number of children killed.
All right.
So
we must bring in Dr. Begum here, who's sitting here very patiently. Dr. Begum, listening to all of that, I would have thought that as an aid worker, the priority is the water, isn't it? It always is in these situations. It's water comes first and foremost.
Absolutely, Richard. I mean, as you can see, hear in Bushra's voice, the distress. Every day we hear the distress in our colleagues' voice.
Terrible to listen to.
Terrible to listen to. So fuel and water, I mean, they come together. You can't really transport water without fuel.
Right.
So there's been a devastating lack of access of supplies and aid, and within that, a lack of fuel. And we also heard from the last couple of days with the communication blackout that the bombs have actually hit the infrastructure for the water supplies. And though the Israelis have put on 2 of the 3 water supplies on, there's 2/3 supply of water, and it's a massive, massive health risk as well. Not only do we have dehydration, we have 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza, of whom 5,000 women will give birth. So what we're hearing from our colleagues is that the mothers who have newborn babies, they cannot breastfeed their children
because they haven't any water. Because
they haven't got any water, and they're drinking seawater. So there is a higher risk of typhoid and cholera spreading across Gaza on top of what is already a humanitarian
I thought drinking
catastrophe.
seawater was actually toxic.
Absolutely.
Salt water.
But what can they do if there is no access to safe water? And not only that, what limited supply of water is available, you will have heard that 500 aid trucks supplies were coming through so far to Gaza, but there's no fuel. So you've got people using their hands and buckets to transport the water. What we have heard, though, is that, as we saw in COVID in the UK, like mutual aid societies and just people doing everything they can to support each other. But if you have no fuel, you can't actually get the aid to where it's needed. And the risk of cholera and typhoid is high.
You must be desperate for a ceasefire.
Absolutely desperate for a ceasefire. And what we're hearing from our colleagues is deep cries of desperation and cries for help, saying, why doesn't it stop? Why does the international community not see our desperation? It has to stop. We need more aid supplies in. We need the hostages out. We need the violence to stop. The bombing has to stop. And those of us who are not directly involved in the conflict, there's nothing stopping us from calling a ceasefire. There shouldn't be.
Well, apart from the politics that might say if you have a ceasefire, the hostages might not be released, and all the politics that surrounded this, and nothing takes away from the original horror that started this, does it? I'm sure you would agree.
There's the politics and there's the humanitarian need. So I'm here to talk about the humanitarian need. And what I will say is that 4 weeks ago, I travelled to Morocco. As you will know, there was an earthquake in Morocco in the Atlas Mountains. It was so easy for me to go into the mountains to help with the aid effort. Aid workers went in and out. You just can't get into Gaza.
No.
So it's actually, you know, the Geneva Convention tells us that unrestricted aid supplies need to be present in a humanitarian conflict. We just can't get the aid supplies in.
I wish we had more time to talk to you, but I'm afraid we're out of it here. But thank you very much indeed for coming in this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, both of you.